I'm going to share with you, since the last time I was here, there are more Lutherans in Africa than in the United States or Canada. You probably didn't know that.
Wasn't that Martin Luther's plan?
That was the whole plan.
Oh, okay.
And according to Martin Luther's plan, there are more Christians in Europe, mostly Lutherans, because Syria has sent a whole raffle of refugees.
Like exiles, or, oh my.
And they have found that the Muslims really like Luther.
How about that?
And they have been coming to our Lutheran churches and getting baptized, which is kind of strange.
Are they receptive to the word, or are they
Very
saying,
receptive.
well, what about our little part where we want to do, there's none of that? Where they try to put a little bit of their own Islam into the Lutheran faith? I hope not.
They have,
Or they just accept it as Luther?
you know, God's in charge of history. This is the way it works.
Okay.
That they were built many years ago, centuries, by the Muslims. And they find that this is a good thing. Something that's a little similar, this is the Spanish Bible, and it's not a real good one, because see that mark in the middle? That what looks kind of like more white? That's because that's Luther's catechism. So the Lutheran Heritage Foundation ordered 10,000 of these from Mexico with the Luther's catechisms in it. And they're almost, this is one of the last ones. Fortunately, I had this hidden away in my library. I do have somebody in my adult class who is fluent in a couple of other languages, not the Bible, but she Arabic, which is kind of strange. We have a pastor over next door in Bethany who's fluent in Arabic, and he does help. But, as usually happens, I actually phoned them because I thought, well, it would be a short time. Maybe they could send me some information from a Lutheran, but they didn't. So I have to kind of play it by ear. This guy's in charge of this was my roommate at Concordia St. Paul and the seminary in St. Louis. Till my last year I traded him in where my wife worked out so much better. But I have represented them many, many, many times. You would think this material is printed in Thailand, because that's where it's cheapest. So you get all kinds of stuff from there. But when I was going to Concordia St. Paul in junior college, I roomed at this man's house. There was a standing order for his mom if she knew that two of us guys from Concordia were coming for lunch. She did one extra pot of mashed potatoes. That was the deal. And down through the ages, I unloaded many bales of hay. That was something that we would do in the evening when we got home from, we painted. We had our own paint contracting company. And that was how we made our money so we could pay for our time at the seminary. Worked out pretty well because I didn't have any debt when I left the seminary, which is kind of unusual. Although it is a little different nowadays. I was back at the seminary for my 90th anniversary since graduation. The guys got it made now. They supply all the material. But the bad news is there were 230 guys in my class, which last year 180. That doesn't cover the needs of the church. So it didn't work out so good. And we're still in that process of trying to get more young men and young women into studying for the ministry. It works at Messiah Lutheran over there a ways. We have 3 new teachers, which we ordinarily couldn't get if they weren't available. One graduated from Seward, one from Texas, and the other one we called from the field. Now, one of the things that they're trying to do right now, I try to keep it quiet. One of my daughters is being considered to teach kindergarten at Messiah. It's not a done deal yet, but it works. It fits the bill. All right, come on in.
It's our forte.
But I don't know that.
It's hereditary, it runs in my family.
My wife is the exact opposite. If you're not there 5 minutes before the beginning, you're not going to go. So, talking about what is happening around the world, last year there were 8 million Lutherans in, what's that big country in Africa? Ethiopia. How do you get 8 million Lutherans in Ethiopia? That's a Muslim country. Because people keep on talking.
Hopefully there's some good missionary work involved in that.
It is.
Spread the word.
Now the thing about it was, last year there were 8 million Lutherans in Ethiopia. This year there are 9 million.
Better and better.
What do you know about Ethiopia that has anything to do with Christianity?
Philip. Philip.
All right, you know that he was one of those travelers. He was baptized in a ditch. That happened to me once. I baptized somebody in a ditch. We had this is in the middle of North Dakota. We had a medical doctor who had a clinic the same town as our church. And the lady was giving birth, and he says, "This is not going well, get in the car." It was only 35 miles to Jamestown. Halfway there was ditch water. Baptized. When you have a confirmation class where somebody was baptized in the ditch, you have something special. It doesn't happen very often. So, she was famous. So in Ethiopia, there's something up there that you should know about. It's a special building. You can't get in it.
Because of what might be inside it,
Yes.
but probably isn't.
Is that the monks that have the
Yes, it is.
Ark of the Covenant?
That's the one.
Eastern Orthodox, I think they are, something like that.
Well, that
They're monks.
go all the way back to, what was that queen's name? Came to visit Solomon? Candace. They were all named Candace. But it goes back that long that this church has really protected in that sense. And that's what they say, that the Ark of the Covenant is in that church there. But
They say it.
nobody can see it. They don't let anybody in.
But think about it, I mean, with the stories, the biblical stories of people with them stumbling and going to even reach for it and getting struck dead, I don't know if I'd want to see it either.
Well, 60 years ago when I graduated from the seminary, we had a place called Obed Edom. It's in Africa, but it was, that was one of our first places of mission, was in Nigeria. That was way back we had a synodical conference, and we worked together with other churches, hard to believe. And you hear about this every once in a while, about people being killed because they're in a church school. That's what it comes from. But anyway, it's a long haul. The synodical conference at that time supported, there were 5 churches. Wisconsin Synod, what would be one of the others?
DLC.
There was one of the Americans, but that was a very strange thing. Anyhow, so now we actually had a young man from Nigeria that lived at our house in Fargo, North Dakota. Can you imagine a guy from the tropics? And him going wild when the first time it snowed. He running around out there in the shorts. But then he found out, hey, this stuff is cold.
This isn't comfortable.
And our congregation brought food for him. He came over to the U.S. He had $96, That was for his college education. It just happened that he got hooked up with us in Fargo. And then from there, he came to our church every Sunday and garnered whatever we brought so that he would have something to eat during that week. The college in Moorhead, Minnesota had a special program for foreign students. So he made it all the way through college with $96. But it was kind of funny because obviously he was kind of black. And our kids never noticed. He used to wrestle around on the floor with them. And then when they filled out a form when they went to Concordia, do you know any black people? No. You didn't think that counted. We still hear from him. He's in California now. He works for a television studio and is still going strong. But he had a sister who was studying to be a nurse in England. Now, his dad was Coldly Palmolive, those names. And I used to have a shaving brush that we used, Coldly Palmolive. But it was very interesting in the process to see how it went. In the area where I am supposed to be sharing with you is all over the world, people are being touched by the Lutheran Heritage Foundation. One of the bigger areas is South Sudan. In fact, if it wouldn't have been for my roommate, Pastor Bob Ron, R-A-H-N, they wouldn't even have a government there. He was very instrumental. Now what he would do is he would find a need, and then he would go somewhere in the U.S., put the thing on somebody else. $10,000 for this, like this Bible, that would have been a $10,000 deal like that. But where did they start? Well, one of where the most Lutherans are.
I think Germany,
A little higher.
Holland, or?
Well, Finland is kind of close to Russia.
Yeah, oh yeah. More close than they want to be in Russia, yes.
Yes. Well, they started a seminary in Estonia, which is on the Baltic Sea, and they had it all set up. So they had like 6 people, 6 different languages. That was the way it went. And part of the money came from the Lutheran Bible translator. Almost all of the first missions that they did were in Russian, because Russia's a huge place. And there's a lot of Lutherans who they shipped on the Orient Express, but it wasn't too kind. You can go downtown in Oklahoma City to one of the organizations, Germans from Russia. They have been in business since before the First World War. And before the First World War, they shipped by rail in cold boxcars to the west. They went east and they dug with their bare hands frozen potatoes. That's all they had to eat when they got there. They have this on film. And, you know, we think Second World War maybe, but no, that was very important. Now, we have had a lot of German Russians. In fact, when I served as pastor in North Dakota, 1/3 Swedish, 1/3 Norwegian, 1/3 German Russian were the extractions of the people. Oh, there were a few Indians there too. A lot of Sioux. We had a church in Fargo that was 4 blocks away from the Indian relief place. Not to mention how often they showed up at Grace Lutheran Church. My secretary had to have a locked door and a TV camera for her sake. But that was a long time ago already. But we have had many people from Russian background that have been received into the kingdom because of Lutheran Heritage Foundation. This one that's back here is kind of strange. You probably wouldn't even recognize it. Burkina Faso. It's Africa. And this is Jesus Never Fails. That was, maybe you bought one of those for your kids.
A friend at Messiah sponsors young ladies from Burkina Faso. That's the only way I know about that
Okay.
country. Certainly not
That's
high
more
school.
than I know. But this is a pretty good sized bunch. And we just don't think this is Africa. But it is, because that's what they do. Bob Ron will be contacted by somebody, and then he wrangles some way to get it. And in so doing, now here's another picture you would recognize. In Germany, somebody with their head covered because it's a Muslim way. So that's, does anybody have any questions about Ukraine? I don't know anything about it. But this organization has been in Ukraine for a long time.
My grandfather was born in Ukraine. My mother's father.
So do you have any contact now?
No, most of the family went to West Germany. That's the only family we know that's still around.
Well, it's interesting, you know, in east of here, Germans from Russia is what are so often called because that's where they were from. But in years gone by, I had members of my congregation who were good friends with Lawrence Well, because he was from North Dakota, and they were Germans from Russia. It was all part of that whole deal. But, you know, in fact,
Oh, Lawrence Boyle?
who's the guy that plays the
Lawrence Boyle.
squeeze box?
Myron?
Myron Florin. All right, his mother was in the nursing home in Fargo. I used to go and visit her, and he would come and play once in a while. I had other members of my church that were in that same facility, so I would get there every once in a while.
Pastor Ross had a colleague, I believe, who, Pastor Yount, Y-O-U-N-T, who was in Ukraine as a missionary, who had to flee when war broke out.
Okay?
So we have Lutherans on the ground.
Yeah,
Oh, yes.
Pastor Young, I think he safely made it to Slovakia.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of people in our churches that are sending help. The Lutheran Church Missouri Synod has been doing a lot of under the table kind of stuff, but that's the way it works.
I've got two friends from college that went into the Air Force, combat medics. They're over there doing, patching people up. And Samaritan's Purse drops a lot of supplies with them on a fairly regular basis.
Are they pulling the wounded out of battle, like active battle, or are
It's,
they?
it's
further back?
mostly refugees, civilian refugees that
Oh,
are,
okay.
that are trying to get out and
Yeah,
get
injured
injured in
along
the
the way.
process.
Yeah, wow.
Well, that same thing was true in the Second World War. You know, we had so many Lutherans that were assisted in some way or another by our church. We didn't broadcast it much.
Well, the public perception might have been quite negative given the hostilities, but, yeah, I often worried about those people who were just kind of caught in the middle. You know, they didn't really,
So what was kind of good for the German prisoners who came over here?
their treatment was way better than being in that cold, frozen tundra somewhere in Russia in a machine gun nest.
And they had Germans to talk to.
Yes, they did. And to work with, and they did stuff. I think I watched a show where they could put on plays, and, you know.
They had
and-
freedom.
And the first thing that they saw when they got here was just vast acreages of farmland. If only I had this at home, so, under the Geneva Convention, it was okay to let them do menial labor, which meant farm work, and they were perfectly okay with doing that. You want to shuck corn? Okay, yeah, well, let's go.
Many of them were paid too.
Yeah, they would get, well, probably not a whole bunch, but paid, yeah. But, I think that was a big eye-opener for a lot.
And it still is.
But I'm sure there were families here who had family in the fight and just day after day, just worried.
And you also had that bunch of Germans from Russia. You know, that was different.
You know, the war starts and we're friends, and then all of a sudden 1940, no, we're not friends anymore. Oh, now what? You know, so they're probably packing up and digging tunnels and trying to get out. What a mess.
So are there any other questions about things that are happening in the world as far as Christianity is concerned? We're not doing a real good job. We need to say more. Here am I, send me, send me.
Well, one thing that happened last week that I was very happy to see was the Supreme Court overturning Roe and Wade. That we've been condoning murder for how many years?
49 years or something.
Every time a baby was killed, it was murder. And now that portion is slowed down at least, if not completely ended. And I am very glad that the Supreme Court acted like they did.
So what is it going to take now?
Pardon me?
What will it take now to
Well,
stop the murder?
Change hearts and minds.
there's other things that can be done too. Gun control for one thing. You know, if you want to look at modern what's going on, look at how we support the Constitution, and then how certain groups are trying to tear the Constitution down.
Provide an alternative argument or narrative. Right now, we're being bombarded with how horrible the decision was. There is another side, another way to look at it, and and Pam, I agree with what you said, that we have to help the women and children who choose to keep their babies and provide support for that, and alternatives to ending a pregnancy. And that's not being heard, it's not being allowed to be heard. There's a lot of misinformation going around and just a lot of angry reaction without anything to counter any of that. There are alternatives to abortion, for sure, and a lot of prevention. And Planned Parenthood, part of the planning is before conception. So, you know, there's a whole lot there that's not being brought out.
Well, I think everybody else seems to have a voice, but yet we don't see much of churches stepping forward and saying, you know, and letting leaders know, hey, listen, as you're saying, that, you know, there are alternative ways to look at this, and perhaps it needs to be addressed these ways instead of just outright allowing or sanctioning basically the murder of innocent children. You know, maybe it's time we do speak up.
Well, when you've got the President of the United States on television all over the country telling people that they've just had their constitutional rights ripped out from under them, that doesn't help.
Well, that's
Because
where
we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
right, and no.
But if you're in the womb, until this changed, you had lost that right.
That's correct.
Yeah, but see, the sad thing is, nowhere in the Bill of Rights does it say that anyone is guaranteed the right of an abortion.
Right.
And that needs to be made clear. So it may constitute a change in the Bill of Rights to make it clear that, look, we are not going to allow this anymore. That the life inside the womb has just as much right to the life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness as anybody else.
I disagree. The Constitution is sound. The language is sound. Roe v. Wade was not sound legislation. It picked and chose. If you ever read it, it's a bunch of gobbledygook and gibberish that created a right to murder children in the womb. A right to kill your kids.
That's my.
And that's what they're claiming now, that the language is there. And the Supreme Court today just affirmed that the language is correct and there. It's not the same court. so.
What was it? Some places were wanting to allow abortions up to 3 days after birth.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, that was legislation, yeah. And well into beyond the first trimester too. But you never hear about what happens in an abortion, you know, how painful the baby
Spot.
feels.
Horrible.
Yeah, I mean, here's the, you have people, women, who are so wrapped up in, well, never mind. But the fact that when an abortion is performed after a certain, you know, after conception, the process itself is painful to the baby.
Yeah.
But no one talks about that.
We had a pastor stand up in front, that was part of his.
Whatever happened to the microphones? Remember the audio that they had some time ago of the microphones that were present during an abortion of that child, of that fetus, being ripped apart, being torn apart, scissors stuck in their head?
Yes.
Why, they're limp and the baby is screaming.
Well, like,
In
I think
pain.
as a church, we just, like most of you are agreeing on there, there's a lot of anger from this has gone on for a long time. But what we have now is opportunity to, like we said, to help and give that alternative to help these women and the children who are born that are unwanted or whatever, and that's where we need to step in as a church and not be so angry at people who it's gonna make their life hard or hard on these kids. That we, you know, we support these women's shelters and we support these groups that are adopting and you know, these kids to give them a chance.
But you know, the interesting thing too is today I happen to be thinking about it, and you know, last night when the decision was handed down, my attitude unfortunately was kind of the wrong way toward the people that were upset about this. At the same time, we need to reach out to those that are upset about this and with compassion, not, you know what I'm saying? Not ha ha ha, we won, you lost, ha ha, you know, but reach out with compassion and maybe there might be a chance that we can reach these people. You know, and maybe they might be able to learn, you know, what they need to understand instead of them just feeling like nobody's listening to them, nobody cares, you know what I'm saying? Cause I mean, you had some people that were pretty upset after that decision was handed down.
But where they're screaming the loudest, where you see the protests and riots and the antics that they're doing, they're in these urban blue areas where they're, relax ladies, you'll still be able to kill your kids with impunity. Don't worry about it. Those laws aren't gonna change in those states and in those cities. You wanna kill your kids, you can do it there, just don't do it here.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
What is the most unfair part of it,
Unfair part of what?
of the abortion?
I think it's unfair that a baby has to pay the price for somebody else's bad decision.
But it's also of a different race.
The
Yeah.
origin of it, yeah.
There will be very soon a chemical abortion. And it's not hard to do it today. And that will really make lame duck out of the whole thing. You can just simply go to the drugstore and get a poison.
That's already out.
Yeah.
You can have it delivered to your house.
Plan B.
Yeah.
See,
Yeah,
and
Plan B.
that's just awful. I mean, it's you basically are condoning killing is what you're doing by doing it, by allowing this to happen. And it's so sad that our leaders can't see that, they can't understand that.
Some leaders.
Well, some leaders, I'm sorry, correction, yeah, some leaders, it's so sad that they cannot see that. You know, getting the vote is more important.
But, you know, we had a big step in a positive thing, and the people who are in agreement with this, that it's a good thing, are angry about it, and we shouldn't be angry about it. We shouldn't be angry at the people who are upset about it. We should be going and still loving and doing God's work.
Right.
Well,
That's right.
the root of all sin is me wanting to be God.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
all sin. It isn't just abortion, it's all sin. And we should be preaching the love and forgiveness and all of that that's going to come with, I mean, that's what we need to do. We need to preach the gospel.
Right.
And every part of the gospel and every group that needs the gospel, including women, men, children, everyone.
Well, and that's why I said too, it goes back to, you know, the people that are upset and all and up in arms about this decision. You know, when you took away my rights and this, that, and the other, we can't approach them with anger or nothing like that, because you're gonna have to show some kind of compassion, otherwise you won't be able to reach those people.
Like Hal was saying, you know, we're angry at people who we'll never see, and we'll never be in person with. We won't ever talk to them on the phone. We won't ever have a message that's sent to them because they are a person on social media, on the news or whatever, in a different state, far, far away, blah, blah, blah. And so, again, we need to just, what can we do for those people?
Right.
We pray, and we send the Holy Spirit can touch them in our prayer, through our prayers, and that somebody who will make contact with them, and who knows, there is a possibility that we may run into them and they see our love through Christ, and they say, there's something different about us.
And I think that's the key. When Eileen said, we don't just preach the gospel, we live the gospel. We have to be the gospel to these people that are in disagreement with us.
Right.
And let them know that there is help there, you know, if they make a mistake. Because too many times we don't do that. Too many times we're too busy like them. Everybody's pointing a finger at each other instead of somebody saying, what can we do?
Happens in our own families and our own friends, where it's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe she did that or he did that. Golly, you know, instead of, it's a miracle, a blessing that God created this being. They didn't do it, you know, but it doesn't happen. You just can't do it. No. And so it's a blessing. And we need to be looking at it that way and preaching it that way, showing that message to those women, fathers, the kids, the families, the mother, you know, everybody.
Building relationships.
Yes. Yes.
Listening to each other better.
And those that we can't stand because we've seen them on our local, you know, spouting off and saying things and doing things that we just detest.
Well, this is
You
also
know?
gonna mean that we're gonna have to step up and do more for places like the pregnancy center.
Yes.
We have to provide the things that these women, that's one of the reasons they do what they do, because they don't wanna have to pay for all this, they don't wanna have to go through all this, and we've gotta step up and help.
And there
There's
isn't
lots of-
any way to take away the pain and the things that come with childbirth and everything you go through in carrying the pregnancy. So that support directly to those women is, and then we're gonna be there when they're born. This is gonna be there when they're born, and you know, and we're gonna make everything available that we can to make it as good.
Somebody brought up on the news, you know, the loss of work hours. They couldn't perform because they were pregnant, or after the birth they couldn't. So the monetary loss of their job, I mean, that's money to help these women to get through the 9 months. And I don't know what they would do afterwards, but put it up for adoption or let the family take care of it. Or I think there's gonna be a lot more children for adoption, for foster care.
I have a
Lot more
question.
help needed.
How would y'all, approach people that would say, well, I don't believe in abortion, but if a woman is raped or incest, well, they should have that baby? Well, I've said that, I mean, I've tried to explain to the person that baby's a miracle, that God created that baby, and if that comes from that, then obviously God has a plan for that child.
And it's not that baby's fault who the father was.
Exactly.
And you, me, and I, our spirit, our souls, our heart, our brain, who we are, that is somebody. And there's nothing, it doesn't have, who our fathers, our mothers were, we had no decision in that. None of us.
No.
God put that together.
So obviously he has a plan.
Yes.
For that child.
Yeah.
For that to happen.
And there's countless numbers of stories of
Yeah.
people who are blessings to the world and to each other.
There was a man, I had Fox on this morning, there was a man, he was a black man, and his mother was raped. And this man is I didn't catch all it because I just walked in, but he is a very outstanding citizen, you know, in politics. He's a Republican, and I mean, he said, thank goodness my mother didn't abort me, because I've been blessed through my whole life with God, you know, I mean, so.
Speaking to that, to the chemical abortion and things, you know, the studies and everything, they've actually they've shown where early on pregnancies where the babies have resisted the abortion, and that where abortions have failed and the person is successful and preaching and speaking out about that, saying that thank goodness that my mom's abortion didn't take effect. And here I am, you know, giving this
No,
message.
and that should say a lot. That's what really blows me away about it, is that should say a lot to the issue of abortion, of whether it should be a common practice or not. I mean,
You know,
it should.
Going back to that and what Pam was saying too, the reason, you know, that there's an argument in also, not only because of the hardships of the mother and the family, is that we have kids right now who are not being taken care of. And we have mothers right now who are not being taken care of. As examples for these women who are having to make these decisions. So we need to be looking to take care of those who are already here. And, you know, the women and children that God directed us to take care of are not being taken care of like they should be. And so again, supporting those groups and ourselves, giving of our time and our treasures to take care of them.
Well, in that case, then it boils down to, it goes right back to love your neighbor as you would yourself. Taking care of each other, regardless of who you are, you take care of each other. We're all God's creation, you know. So you can't, you know, those that are not taking care of their children, we can't leave them out of those children either. You know. And maybe it's a clear indication that we need to do better on all fronts. Be more vigilant on all fronts, not just those involved with the whole abortion thing, but everyone. You know.
Pastor Muenchow, your sermon today touches on that. Who will go?
And the Bible readings.
Yeah, oh, and the Bible readings today, whoa, I mean, Proverbs, I mean, yeah, we're going to speak what Hal said. I mean, I perceive what he said, I understand it, But somebody who's on the other side, they're not gonna be listening to you, and you might expect insults, danger, harm,
And that's
because
when you
they
pray for
don't
them.
wanna listen, and that's what
Right.
Proverbs says. A scoffer, you can try to correct them, but just be prepared, you might get a backlash.
And that's when you pray for them. This is, we're told to pray for our enemies, that's when you pray for them. If you can't, if they won't listen to you,
Yeah.
then all you can do is pray for them and let God deal with it, because otherwise, you know.
That's what it's about, wisdom from God, and He's the only one that can give them that wisdom to listen, to comprehend. But I think we've got a big job ahead of us.
That's for sure.
We're always asking, what would God want us to do? What does God want us to do? What does God want us to do?
Yeah.
Well,
There's
sometimes
your-
when you ask, you're given the answer, and
Look,
it's
right
work.
there.
We've got our work cut out for us.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of kids and mothers to take care of already, and hopefully we have a whole lot more. Hopefully we have more that we can take care of.
God sends the refugees to us
Yeah.
to take care of, if we don't go to them.
Don't rely on the government, don't rely on legislators, don't rely on the process that takes forever and ever to get things moving. Grassroots.
Our law, our plan is not get the government to take care of the women and children.
Right. I was listening to a conversation yesterday between Tony Perkins and Ben Carson, and that was one point that they made quite clear. This is the time for the churches to step forward and come up. This is not a government thing. You do not want the government involved in this. It could go south.
Yeah.
Because it changes every 4 years.
Yeah.
That's true, that is true.
Got them on TV going, this is a sad day.
Ben Carson's still around? I met him once, actually, when he was running for president. Yeah, I liked him a lot. I voted for him in the primary. That was the same year that Obama came on the picture.
Who are you? We have short memories.
Yes, we do.
It's, like the book Sloop to.
But like one of the guys, I'm not gonna mention his name because I'm not politicizing here, but when he gets on there and he says, he's pointing to Planned Parenthood, and he's going, every year, 400,000 children have died through this. And I'm going, wow, if they hadn't been aborted, to think of all the children more children that might be that need adoption, that need foster homes. And that's when I thought, this is something that's getting ready to happen.
We better start preparing.
Prepare to help, yeah.
I'm here to tell you that adoption is a good thing.
I know, you preached on that.
He is.
Yeah, I know.
I
Have firsthand information.
was adopted into a farm family. They milked 27 cows, fed 25 beef calves, farrowed 15 sows, had 500 laying hens, which got to be my job. I had an important thing. On Monday morning, when I went to grade school, I had skim milk spilled down my Oshkosh bagosh. And we didn't wash until Saturday.
Ooh, that
They got-
smells good about Thursday, doesn't it?
Yeah, it got to be very stiff.
You did?
But I will tell you that in spite of not seeing my 3 sisters for 5 years, it was blessed because I went to Concordia St. Paul for 6 years, and seminary for 5, and they helped me all the way. And when I graduated from the seminary, I didn't have any debts, which was very unusual, because they were a good family. Well, I can tell you that God's love is most important of all. No getting around it. Now we have a special remembrance that you must remember. Isaiah 16. Angels, with 2 they covered their eyes, 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they flew. You have to keep that in mind. Because you can't remember it. All right, thank you.